Prince Harry is reportedly furious after shocking tapes from Tom Bower were released, tapes that could change everything about how the public views the royal drama. Tonight, we dive deep into what these recordings reveal, why they've shaken the royal family to its core, and what this means for Harry's future. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear is explosive. A room brimming with tension, the type of tension where the smallest noise is heard on max volume. Overhead, an old audio device buzzed to life. The air almost crackled with static, and a clear voice, deliberate, calm, female. It was a voice that millions had heard before, in docile interviews and earnest public speeches, but this time it was not for the public eye. He was not this time writing back for anyone but the reader. A voice thought to be Meghan Markle speaks with someone simply called sounding fully confident in its lack of need for names. With their undeniable intimacy regarding travel logistics, timing, and a particular sound bite that would light off smoke alarms. They are allowed to be there 48 hours in advance. That should be good for rehearsals and photos, she said, no school schedules or small talk inquiring after the children. The discussion resembled the coldly clinical mathematics of slotting actors into their roles on a Broadway stage. I just ask you to hit that like button, subscribe if you are new to the channel, and turn on notifications. This comment alone went up a firestorm of theorizing. Ever since the release of the tape, it has been replayed, analyzed, and discussed by pundits and social media users everywhere. Why the 48-hour time frame? Exactly who was responsible for carrying them? That last contention is by far the most controversial implication in this raw recording, the insinuation that the children so central to Harry and Meghan's media portrayal may not live with them full-time at all, or indeed never have. Revelations of the existence of this tape that until now had been kept under wraps are reportedly due to investigative writer Tom Bower, a self-styled scourge on royal image management who has made a name for himself by lifting up the proverbial rug and sweeping into the cobwebby corners where movers and shakers would rather he did not. This is not the first time Bower has differentiated between optics and actual current conditions. His previous exposés have caused uproar in Buckingham Palace, but if verified, this one could be his most devastating yet. Inside sources stated that Prince Harry reportedly hit the roof and is said to have had no idea their separation was on the table. When friends heard the recording for the first time, he was described as being hit in the chest. Harry has spent years publicly going to war against his family, systematically casting off accusers and rumors and the ugliest headlines, cutting ties with his own kin, distancing himself from lifelong friends, karate chopping back at a press establishment that few royals have had the guts to even approach. But not from a tabloid or disgruntled relative. Her very own voice, her own words allegedly. Over the next few days, details of what went on behind closed doors were leaked. Some maintained Harry tried to get an explanation, while others alleged Meghan had tried to downplay it as a harmless misunderstanding being blown out of proportion. The stakes suddenly grew much higher for Harry, who has built his public persona almost entirely around being supportive daddy. If the public began to believe that the children are in fact not living with Harry and Meghan, it would strike at one of their most valuable assets, a perceived truce with royal tradition. They can all be modern parents coping without staff. This is quite important because in the world of celerity and royal king perception holds more value. The followers do not only enjoy the photos and also tales shared, however also make psychological investments in the story which is provided to them. He also said that Harry and Meghan continue to sell themselves as people who are no longer high-profile royals, but also as parents trying to protect their children. There is no way that the carefully honed image they have built of their children being high-fashion accessories to go with a certain public appearance could possibly survive. And then there is an extra layer to this story that makes it even more powerful. The rules are unwritten but impregnable in the realm of royal controversies. It is okay to protest the institution and rage against archaism, but you can never compromise the aura of innocence that surrounds royal contain-but applications. This boundary has been respected even in the most bitter of disputes. An idea that Harry and Meghan's children are not living with them, a suggestion that would be viewed as not only a personal failing but a betrayal of the public. Once accepted, the backlash has been so intense, social media has been flooded with conversations on the subject. Fans of the pair defended, suggesting that the reference is easily misinterpreted and flown in could have meant long-distance travel for their families or security-controlled trips. Yet detractors take issue with the clinical nature of the communication and its robotic timing, and their view is more than a little transactional. Conspiracy theories take it even higher, hinting at a potential systems-level deception in motion. Additionally, Tom Bauer discussed the recording even though he declined to state its exact source due to confidentiality agreements. Recent interviews suggest a clear pattern of image control and alleged on-field activity discrepancies that Bauer believes are confirmed by the recording. The wording suggests that he is not directly accusing the couple of lying, but the way in which it is written definitely implies where the readers, probably, should land on this matter. Some officials in the palace have privately claimed to be closely tracking the developments. Informal conversations among family members about how they might contain the potential damage are revealed by an insider source to counterbalance King Charles's public silence. The dilemma for the rest is to either step in and risk giving grounds for further investigation or sit and let free public opinion take its course. The power of this moment is as much in the facts on the tape as what they sit within. For years, Harry and Meghan have carefully constructed a public image about freedom of spirit, the heart of philanthropy, and fighting for the best version of themselves. But it's a fragile image at the best of times, one that this recording could rapidly take a sledgehammer to, albeit from behind enemy lines, which would be particularly galling for Harry. What follows is a story, a hilarious yet serious story, about high-stakes image management, where one off-the-cuff remark can spark an international incident. Explore the exposure of this recording, what it exposed and why its release has such poignancy for all sides, including the royal family. Timing, motivation, and collateral damage all will be examined as we unpeel yet another layer of the onion that is this story. The headlines are incomplete, because in the end these stories are not really about a phone call. All of it directly connected to the bond that exists between a married man and woman, between someone who rules an entire country and their citizens, and between royalty and the system they reside over. When its trust is shattered, there isn't a strategy to PR spin it back together. It seemed you could still hear the haunting resonance of that recording long after it had finished playing. It wasn't powerful, it wasn't loud, but it has a way of staining reputations. It must have felt like an enormous weight on Harry. This was not some story, fed to the press by a bitter employee or an internet rumor mill in full swing. Well, it turns out, if you judge from the way her victim spoke, allegedly. Yet even the many degrees of denial somehow could not wipe out what everyone had heard. And for a man, whose every second of his post-royal life was based on defending her from what he believed to be unfair attacks upon her, watching this must have been like watching the very ground beneath his world break up. Important to understand that this is not just a one-off scandal. It comes after years of whispered speculation about the appearance and the upbringing of her children. The public first saw Archie and Lily when the Sussexes released photos of them, but their subsequent debut appearances have been carefully orchestrated and shrouded in significant secrecy. Supporters said doing so was necessary to protect them from prying media scrutiny. Critics argued that it was a crucial part of a branding strategy to control access given the rising interest. The rise of this recording has served as a vindication for critics, an embarrassment for supporters, and left everyone trying to reconcile the voice in the tape with the storyline they know. Whether real or virtual, children have a special place when you are creating your royal image, and it was just not their age, as I said. All of that heritage imbues them with more than just siblinghood, it makes them history and continuation. The couple saw their children as a break from the stuffiness of royal life, an opportunity to raise them in more everyday, stable surroundings. But if the tape is real, which it very well may be, this perception is dismantled and a sickeningly transactional and cold dynamic enters into play. Harry is now in an impossible position where he can't disprove the hazardous claims of the recording without appearing defensive or complicit. There are reports that validating the tape implies the confession of an unsettling truth: there was deceit in their private conversations. There is the anger, there is that feeling of disbelief and above all, humiliation behind the curtains. In the past, Harry has viewed himself as a protector of his family. But suddenly, the only person he has ever tried to shield, in this case his wife, Meghan, is a threat to them. Tom Bower stoked the embers with surgical precision, releasing details bit by strategically leaked bit, the tape and its remnants, even hinting at more to come. In keeping the public complicit and the speculation simmering, Bower maintains an air of mystery around himself. In fact, the more interviews he conducts in the wake of new headlines, he spins bits and pieces of patterns and inconsistencies into a damning narrative. However, the question that plunges over this is yet to be answered: where came from the troublemaking tape? The existence of the private call points to a source of information, a cassette record player, and a laptop microphone. The point is that the person that captures such a conversation as the one between Meghan and Thomas is recording private talks, a trusted confidant betraying Meghan, or some form of surveillance that no way attains to any accidental recordings. In other words, it wasn't "I had my phone in my pocket during the conversation." If the former, Meghan has to figure out a big problem outside the scope of this problem. Someone who labeled themselves as close enough to Meghan to transcript the conversation in front of Harry, sold her out for the profit or the game. To the contrary, if the latter, Meghan, and the rest of the family have a lot to say about what they can call private in the questionable controversies of their reputation. The mystery wasn't what's happening, but why some reporter thinks the world has the right to share such a minute in their private sphere, which in return becomes public attention. The question is why there was a sharp contrast between reality and one's telegraphed public persona. It's like showing those picture-perfect family portraits in some magazine where, when the camera is put away, reality has been nothing but a disaster. The contrast between how the image is portrayed and the reality only imagined is where the spark of interest touches down and damage becomes an issue. However, what happens next is even more important, and the timing of the release couldn't have been worse. Right at the peak of Harry and Meghan's debates about media coverage, right as they were most prepared to attack their previous lives post-monarchy, as the royal family was most prepared to stand up to their PR attacks with only a week's worth of content being published, the worst possible thing, even as the recording becomes part of the uproar, it becomes bigger than that, overshadowing the rest of the details about the residents. This may be the best opportunity for the entire situation. They believe the story has fallen into their laps, that they hold the high ground and they can now maintain the silence they planned. While this blowjob storyline helped give the public a taste to regain it, the only one who is disgruntled is Harry and Meghan. Meanwhile, the longer they go without addressing it themselves, the more speculation will run rife. But every time they put out a press release, it inches the narrative forward. Tricky context, nowhere to go, needs careful assuaging. And even then, the damage already inflicted may be irreparable. These tapes are not made in a boardroom, a newsroom, or behind Copsqueaky palace walls. No, it begins with a whisper, gentle murmurs passed from one person to the next in the knowledge that they know something others do not. For months, and in some cases years, whispers within certain circles have abounded about the recordings of private conversations with Meghan Markle. The speculation that went around said they might have been false hope from her vaccine-hesitant detractors or idly gossiping wannabes. But behind the scenes, actual progress was being made. Investigative journalist, Tom Bower, the kind who gets past official narratives, was poking around this subject. Known for his no-holds-barred approach and a willingness to scrutinize the most guarded public figures, Bower is such a no-nonsense force that he is able to identify chinks in the perimeter armor of even the most well-protected. After spotting these vulnerabilities, he continues to chisel away until the walls start tumbling in around their foundation. The origin of these tapes is shrouded in mystery, but what is clear is that he did not merely happen upon the material. Those who have worked with Bauer describe his MO in a chess sense, as if he were preparing to carefully make a series of plays, move pieces around and wait until the most opportune time to strike. In this case, they were relationships in networks of association tied to the personal and professional private worlds of the Sussexes. A few with direct personal connections to the inner circle, though they had been separated under distressing circumstances, others through business or philanthropy. Where Bauer excels is in establishing trust with these acquaintances, getting them to air their complaints and convincing them they have nothing to lose by spilling the beans. Listeners who have heard the more than 16 hours of recordings in their entirety say they are not one continuous recording but snippets compiled together. Each segment shows the family at a different point in their lives, the most controversial part of which, now making headlines, reportedly showed Meghan working out a schedule to have all the children flown in for an overnight stay before attending public engagements. But the fact there are several tapes means Meghan might be communicating with more than just her handler. The case grows more enigmatic when the 10 hours of recordings reveal the handler never identifying himself and both men are speaking like they knew each other through a kind of shorthand way, which indicates that these were not unique discussions within investigative circles. While this ambiguity also creates trouble when authenticating, at the same time it only thickens the mystique of these tapes. Who is this individual? How did they come to be able to manage it all? Most importantly, how were these conversations obtained in the first place? The decision to release the recordings was part timing, but also what Bauer termed content. He knows the news cycle and when it is prepared to have an open disclosure. The couple have been increasingly scrutinized of late, with questions about their commercial ventures and strained familial relationships being raised following involvement in public events. They would not just be shocking in the context of this race, for those who have even a modicum of doubt, but such a release would confirm suspicions. The real release was careful in its approach. Not all of the materials was released at once by Bauer. Rather, he permitted an essential part to rise initially so it would take off over social and all the tabloids than a few online people could discuss. It was also strategic in that it optimized the collection of focus and at the same time maintained a possibility for more surprises. The story went into a lull, the hype having died down, and maybe some tidbits or foreshadowing would come out here and there to get people to care about the story again. The backlash was immediate and fierce, with news outlets scrambling to get copies of the recordings. Analysts disassembled each and every syllable, breath, tone. By choice, was Meghan using a cold and professional tone in order to keep something of herself separate from the children? Is 48 hours in Brussels, whether that be a naive reference to travel arrangements, or something more sinister in suggesting this was merely for public appearance? No definitive answers only served to ratchet up speculation behind the scenes. There were reportedly divides among Harry and Meghan's inner circle. Others said to confront the tape directly, giving an explanation in no uncertain terms before telling it grew unchangeable. Others warned that the act of making any statement would just draw out story appearing in more PR land. The phenomenon is sometimes called the oxygen dilemma, that responding to a rumor can give it life. The problem was the rumor had gone beyond speculation. Now, it turned into an audible reality open for the public to judge. Harry found a situation particularly rough on him. He has always been fiercely private about his personal life, especially when it comes to his kids. The idea that their personal lives could be scrutinized, particularly if his wife's comments may have provoked it, was almost unfathomable. Friends say he was blindsided to learn the conversations were recorded and proclaimed himself completely shocked by what unfolded. Meghan added, "This was also particularly challenging for you." Over the years, she has polished an image that leans heavily on her motherhood. In her interviews, speeches, and philanthropic work alike, she repeatedly speaks of her children, often depicting them as the reason behind every decision she has made or witnessed to the beginning of each new chapter of endless renewal. If we doubted her true identity, our most poignant collective experience would be unsubstantiated. Bauer knew this all too well. He recognized, as only a seasoned veteran can, that the most devastating revelations are ones that don't just hit skin deep but slice like a blade at the very heart, not just underneath of everything a public figure his work had so hard to bury and disguise and construct. There is menace in their shadow, the sinister implications they raise, and the dissonance between what Meghan seemed to be saying publicly and what the content hinted at. And that is what makes this aspect of the story so compelling, because it is a place in between knowing and not knowing. No, the recording is real, but its full context remains hidden. While the tape captures these voices resonantly, their real intention is shrouded in the disgruntled void of space interloging. Rumors proliferate, and characters are shaped almost as much by what is imagined as by reality. Bauer understands this relationship, and he has deftly leveraged it. The tapes would eventually leave the realm of the kids, or who was in charge of the kids. They sought control. When a person/organization has control over their own image, they have control the narrative and in turn control the truth. Pressing record is just the tip of the iceberg of all that have wrong in pursuit of control. There was a brief pause when the tape was first played publicly before any responses. It wasn't that they were vaguely articulated. Because the voice, an instantly recognizable smooth Californian accent that one associates with TV interviews, podcasts, and global children's charity speeches, was his. But it wasn't at all a repeat of the last time, and this time, there was none of that charm. The warm chuckles and gentle tone that made the speaker more likable were now in every sense of those words gone. His voice was simple, naked, and deliberate. Meghan Markle's purported voice sounded like someone paid £1 to read out an introduction, the effects of which were as bland as if you had just been given an anesthetic and then slapped on the face a good 10 minutes later. A change in cadence occurred, followed by a hint of entering the umpteenth reiteration. She came out with a phrase that set off firestorms. She said they had been allowed a window of 48 hours before the event. Of course, this story did not include the names of the children, but its implication was just as heavy. Their pre- or post-activities were not part of the conversation, so it comes off as focused solely on these short periods designed for anything but familial bonding. From the other end of the call, I could hear in the handler's voice that this was not an uncommon request. In a low, cautious voice, confirming they could get it done. To the uninvolved listener unaware of this tit-for-tat, it could have seemed like a routine coordination of plans while they discussed clearances and flight privacy, a scripted conversation between two people going through yet another iteration in their minds. But for those well-versed in the speculation about where, exactly, the kids are living, it almost read as a confirmation of one particular controversial theory. Those experts who have been asked to comment on the recording by various media outlets said the clip is in line with the story Meghan has been telling, and that it matches her vocal patterns, including cadence, vowel pronunciation, and sentence structure, which she uses in other publicly available recordings of her voice. There were certain subtleties too. Some of the ways she would draw out words conveyed the same message. While we have no official confirmation, the similarities are striking enough that it's difficult to call this speculative. The real-time data that is discussed in this conversation makes the story come to life. According to the source, Meghan offered to slot them in around the existing schedule and made sure the photographer was ready. Those scrutinizing the clues request did not miss a casual inquiry about how they were doing, as parents trying to coordinate their children's travel might ask if that parent was even concerned. The ambience was less like a performance and more businesslike. There was no overt ice, venom, or distance, but left an air to be with something. The problem comes from that very purpose being the fertile field for doubt in a situation where your survival is having protected your kids from public showing. This further feeds into a larger disconnect in terms of how the public view these young people, as conversation steers from them being about kids to them being pawns of an event. In this story, the handler is never named. Bauer has not revealed who these folks are, only that they are known to very few and hold secret logistical information. Who that handler was is a matter of speculation. Is it a belt personal assistant, or affiliated with security operations? The way they carry themselves, the way their voice turns, and all this procedural language bordering on legalese suggest repeated experience in such negotiations, which also drops a hint at some sort of role beyond occasional coordination. Members of the public seized on this, some noting how the children had been wheeled out before decamping to seclusion for lengthy periods after previous such occasions. Critics began comparing these appearances to travel schedules, looking for ordered steps that fit the 48-hour window discussed during the call. Although no definitive link between the two is proven, just the suggestion of one has ignited furious debates even on the web. Others argue that flown in might mean only movement between safe bubbles and not multiple households. Some say that the reference to both 48 hours and photographers clearly implies it was a set-up recording. The shorter the message, the easier it can be interpreted, and in our current instant pundit era of computer speak, those interpretations coalesce into beliefs rather fast for Harry. If he has indeed listened to this entire recording, then the effect of it would have been a personal one even before its public revelation. It can be unsettling in any marriage to hear your spouse's voice on a surprise recording, defiantly contradicting the face you've long maintained. But insiders say Harry was left shell-shocked after noticing a shift in Meghan's tone as the interview progressed. He felt an emotional connection to her flat conversation about logistics contrasted with her excitement talking about events and the media coverage. It seems the panel's emphasis on sequence of topics rather than literal wording may have struck a chord with Harry. Which, in interviews after the recording came out, Harry has doubled down on, not just what was said but how authentic the emotions captured were. Instead, he suggests that the tapes are revealing simply for what is missing, the warmth and spontaneity one would assume from such a conversation. Whether this silence indicates apathy or simply the details and timing of his arrival are issues that remain a matter of speculation, but public sentiment has steered towards skepticism. In particular, public figures have a long history of being brought down by scandals concerning recorded voices. Statements made in writing can be discredited, an interview can be chopped and formed to someone else's ends, but a voice, with its tone and pauses and inflections, that shit travels. While the context remains a topic of intense debate, the impression left by the voice is indelible. The words may be forgotten, but their impact is ingrained. Meanwhile, the specifics of this release has changed and sharpened the prevailing discourse around Harry and Meghan's story management approach. They have communicated their side of the story for decades through tightly controlled channels, carefully arranged interviews, scripted documentaries, and podcast episodes crafted to paint them in the best possible light. This version, however, is unedited and simply raw, which is a change of pace considering that it has been quite some time since they lost control over how they are perceived. It is worth noting, Bauer has selected his words very carefully in describing the recording, avoiding sweeping allegations that could be subject to litigation. Instead, he offers a series of broader themes and questions for you to consider. Deploying strategy over emotion in this way helps to maximize your message exposure while limiting personal harm. What is more, kept in the greater context of texts yet to be disclosed, the tale continues to have appeal and the public continues waiting for further revelations. The voice on the other end of the line that was so familiar, once a source of reassurance for fans, now sounds like it belongs to a stranger. Every viewing of the recording, be it on television or online, moves from the letter of the content to its emotional echoes. The real truth does not matter, the interpretation of the scandal can be what ends up being most important in a situation like this. The heart of this chapter is based on this simple truth. And there may be some disagreements in the specifics, but you cannot unhear what you've heard. But if there is one resonating chord from this which haunts Harry the most, it would be that. But if the leaked recording was the spark that set off this firestorm, the mystery of this handler is the gasoline keeping this controversy burning on. There is an air of style about the word handler. It makes me think of spies, secret missions, or people who take care of all the important things in your life quietly without being noticed. Hard to think that Meghan had virtually given up on it, and then there you have it. The guy in the recording who's supposed to be handling all of this is now fodder for internet head-scratching. Mostly because they are still somewhat of an enigma, and it is difficult to definitively say who or what the destroyer really are. As no one has been able to definitively place them, nor determine what jobs they might have had at the palace, across many paragraphs of painstaking scrutiny every syllable, intonation, or out-of-shot muses are being weighed for possible telltale verbal giveaways. On the line was a steady male voice that gave an impression of being not just familiar but very well acquainted with administrative logistics. There were hesitation in his voice, no need for Meghan to probe or delve. He appeared to understand her motives and what needed doing. Recognizing the familiar gesture of the past, a history of traded experiences. There have been many theories floated about his real identity, but the most believable is that he is a senior staff assistant. Usually referred to a personal assistant is the person responsible for managing travel logistics, coordinating with security teams and ensuring schedules are executed flawlessly. But the word handler connotes control and a lack of transparency rather than service, which may not fully encompass what people appointed to this position are actually doing. A theory has been posed that would see a member of Harry and Meghan's security team organizing the travel itinerary for their kids in light of such public figures, to deal with any safety risks. Possible backlash and types of clearances, privacy measures. The explanation for clearance protocol makes sense, but this begs the question, what level of security personnel involvement in which is just a Big Mac, let alone long-term protection? Meanwhile, others have speculated that the handler may be connected to a third-party service appointed to oversee the children's public appearances, though there are no real grounds behind this. The nature of the language, like discussing children being part of their schedules and seeing if it's viable to send photographer Slegets, has led many people to believe it sounds more like event planning than actual parenting. When speaking about these theories with Preston, Tom Bower doesn't give away any specific details within the show but manages to, in my own words, dance around the questions with his vocal performances through various subtle actions and selection of words. The guy on the other end of the line knows his job, and that is all I give away for now. This ambiguity is in their favor as it keeps the speculation alive. Each new potential theory sparks another cycle of public debate, keeping the narrative in the news. The allure of the handler mystery is how they succeed in forcing people to come face to face with the inconsistencies in that lesson by showing those same public figures, acting just like themselves. Harry and Meghan are devoted parents who are actively involved in all stages of their children's upbringing. A handler, especially one who talks about these children in such logistical terms, disrupts this narrative. It gives the impression of organizational and delegation processes which fall flat when juxtaposed with the image of a small, private family. Those who are insiders in behind the scenes of Walk and Talk Feet of Dirt's own home suggest that having a go-between is just par for the course. Teamwork often keeps high-profile members one step removed, handling the day-to-day of family life, whether it's schedules or security. The only thing different about this scenario is the public posture. She has spoken out in the past about how she does not like traditional pageant life, preferring instead to raise her children without the strict constraints of upbringing that she herself rebelled against. The idea of a handler being an inseparable part of their routines contradicts this message. Additionally, the identity of the handler is important because it might reveal who made the recording. If the handler had taped the conversation, that could look suspiciously like a premeditated betrayal. Maybe for whatever reason, someone in Meghan's camp has decided to hold on to receipts, as we would say. In cases where the recording was obtained using different means, the person who performs might not even realize that he or she is taking part in an important event and become an instrument of some larger plan. Signs are that this person's links extend beyond Harry and Meghan with their own household. The procedural quality of the language suggests, in addition to a control placed squarely within endemic permissions and persons authorized to do them, some kind of coordinated relationship with outside actors. This could indicate that you are working with a larger firm who services high-profile clients, which makes it even more difficult to ascertain. The person in such a case may not be even necessarily a close but an old hand, seamless and accompanying several customers. This person is a big wild card. It could agitate Harry a great deal to be confused about who the third party was taping, and some other private conversations might be shared. This breeding ground of distrust cultivates fear on both sides of every interaction and leaves everyone to be at least somewhat paranoid, if not for their own protection. At the same time, a ravenously curious public has unleashed what verges on the insane level of interest you'd expect from an online investigative community poring over audio, parsing travel schedules and comparing suspects. Each new hypothesis brings with it a host of questions to be discussed. A solid position on both sides, each of them convinced they have cracked the case and Bauer steadfastly refusing to confirm or deny any allegation. Theories, on the other hand, will never cease and desist. It is this fascination that lies not just in being curious but in the appeal of what is hidden. Even when it comes to people in the public eye, their lives contain many secrets. An individual given human form to represent one of these facets, a handler, perhaps one with far-reaching effect, but in no way meant to be known outside its intended sphere. It is a secret only because it draws an invisible line between visibility and secrecy, the distinction which makes this enigma fascinating. The words 48 hours have taken on a life of their own beyond mere text and comprehension, becoming the throbbing heart of this whole affair. It almost sounded as a customary period of time for a process and with some sort of antecedent in that leaked conversation. But once those words entered the public realm, they were deconstructed, repeated and reframed as a stand-in for how everyone imagines the secret parts of Harry and Meghan's lives must work. Given the tight hold with which the Sussexes have managed their children's public exposure since Archie was born in 2019, and again after Lilibet's birth in June of last year, it helps to understand how important this 48-hour window is. This absence during public appearances has been few and far between but carefully choreographed. Photos are rare, their event partnership limited, the images that circulate largely taken by photographers of long relationship rather press personnel. Supporters say this is to protect the kids, but die-hard traditional seeds advocates, however, see native as a ploy to create scarcity and raise the price of pictures, but also of brands. But a new report that has been made public suggests the kids were due to arrive exactly 2 days before a particular public appearance. But this arrangement is crucially timed. It is impossible to visit long-established family within the 48-hour window, but there is plenty of time for practices so that they get into their routine, and so they look well-rested to smile in photographs. The exact timing, rather than some days before, kind of vaguely points to the faces of children as being as scripted as almost every other detail of a high-profile public appointment. A review of the last few years reveals that there are indeed some patterns which seem to match this time span. There are records of the children appearing at, or near to, significant moments, as captured in christening photographs, occasional charity photos and brief shots from their Netflix Ventures concerts. In all cases, the children had not been seen walking with their parents in the lead-up to these events, and a similar absence thereafter. It has put the 48-hour back in spotlight, and these gaps are once again under scrutiny. It is only a theory, however royal watchers have started to speculate about this based on travelogue and diary dates. This was referred by some to the 2022 Platinum Jubilee celebrations, where Lilibet reportedly hosted a big birthday bash in the UK for her closest friends and family. There were few public photographs from the trip. Images of the children appeared briefly in tightly controlled settings. Observers note their erratic appearances, with long stretches between sightings. Of course, this alone is not evidence, but it does keep the speculation alive. But what makes the 48-hour mark more clever is its surgical handling of family dynamics. 2 days for the children to be present appears somewhat contrived when children are generally allocated time-spanning days, weekends or breaks. That may feel a bit transactional, commodifying something most of us treat as emotional and personal, the family reunion, with the cool calculation we've come to expect from Hollywood or sports negotiations-related approaches. This, critics say, feeds into a larger criticism of Meghan and how she lives her public and private life, one that paints her actions as scripted performances set up against real moments. The 48-hour limit is that for them, it's not a mere jot of convenience, it's a means through which control over every element of the kid's public outings can be carefully managed and calculated to work in her favor. Advocates for that narrative of course point out it could be a matter of national security requiring tighter control. Children, especially if they are traveling in high-profile scenarios, have a whole plethora of security protocols that need to be set up so that clearances can be issued, travel routes planned and media exposure prevented. That 48-hour feature in that development could now have just as easily been the time needed to arrange transportation for the children and get them out to specific events. But the context of the recording belies that excuse. A few listeners commented that the leaked call did not address security issues, only photo and scheduling. The omission of these details does make us question the rest of the safety equipment here, and whether it was skipped in favor of supercar aesthetics. When it comes to the court of public opinion, not mentioning can be just as bad as doing something. How this news hit Harry on a public image level was key. Harry has gone to great lengths to portray himself as a modern father who prioritizes his role away from the royal glare. The way the system works, children can visit on weekends and holidays, plus any other time a caregiver allows it, means many people are in this position. This may only be for the short term or it may be a logistical move, but nobody likes how it looks. If you leave out details, people will default to the worst possible kind. There is, this time, so wide a gulf for the fabric of family life. In this sense, Tom Bower has created an opportunity and leveraged on the 48-hour window to its fullest potential. This made for a simple, lasting, and constantly argued over fulcrum in his comments. When it comes to intricate scandals, the requirement for so much background can be a killer. But here the situation can be summed up in a number we will all recognize. Like Barbara Lee says, it's a great soundbite for the papers and Twitter. From there, the phrase was memified to a new life. Parody accounts, and satirical posts riffing on the idea of 48 hours in general, as a metaphor for something contrived or fake, have also surfaced. Where critics use it to mock Meghan's credibility, supporters employ it in a comedic capacity to diminish its importance. In either case, this phrase is repeated again and again, so it seeps into the minds of that public. Another suggestion is that an even deeper cultural factor, one of which resonates at a societal level, underpins this problem. In the era of everything needing to be authentic, she argued that our suspicion that family moments could be staged was in fact a betrayal of trust. What people want more than anything is to have faith in the sincerity of what they are seeing, especially when it comes to children. This trust is very fragile, however, and the suggestion that maybe these moments are a bit fake erodes that trust, and rebuilding trust is really hard to do. And the 48-hour window gives rise to troubling questions related to the propriety and welfare of the children at issue. Where are they spending the majority of their time if being transported for short visits? But who cares for them in those times? How much of their day-to-day life do they actually live with their parents? The answers to these questions might well be benign, but by not bringing them into the light of day without full transparency, they hang around like implicit accusations. For Meghan, the danger is how this plays out in the larger narrative. For years, she has faced a backlash for managing at least some doors to her life in ways that allow them to further the KKW beauty brand. That in itself is not nefarious, though audio from the call implies Simpson's family life may even be as carefully managed for public consumption. The impossible-to-fake feeling that is created at the moment individuals realize that what they see has been fabricated leads to doubt in everything else that has been presented so far. For Harry, this is a danger on a highly personal level. If the general public sees him as a participant in the mock representation of fatherhood revealed by the faked photo shoots, then much of the general good feeling that he evokes from this point onwards will be rapidly lost. Much of the charm of Harry stems from his genuine-sounding position, and he is someone who has voluntarily abandoned all evidence of royal privilege in favor of a more down-to-earth lifestyle. The threat to this authenticity, therefore, is not only a risk to his public image, but also to his private identity as a person who professes to value openness and honesty above all else. In this context, the 48-hour period is not just a passing detail, it is a crucial anchorage point for the entire affair. It is precisely the kind of hard, empirical detail or alleged detail that ensures people can make up their minds quickly and decisively about something, even without having almost a frame of reference. At least until this issue is cleared up, it will continue to dominate the overall narrative around this affair. Prince Harry might have faced challenges before: public assaults, endless media examination, infringement of the protection, and even partitions inside his family. But the use of the recording, and particularly how plainly it was embedded in the 48-hour lineage, was unique. This was not an attack by foreign powers, a headline dreamed up by some tabloid editor, or a story leaked to the ends of the earth by another royal family member. This, supposedly, was Meghan's voice itself, and for Harry it landed less. On the indictment of his character previously so mercilessly dissected in the UK press, although she had shared a little thought about this somewhere along her interview, and more deeply than ever before. It had penetrated right into the heart of his innermost private space. People who were with him, the first time that he heard the recording, just sat still. There was dead silence before he asked to hear it a second time. The third time he listened back, it came through with more than just the words as they spoke them. But no, instead he was looking for even the softest inflection, a different shade to give them context. He wanted to hear what he thought was care in her voice, or some motherly warmth that might be able to reassure him that this situation had gotten out of hand. All that showed was a rhythm, calm and impersonal. It was the emotionless voice of someone carrying out a job, without any personal tie. Harry had always prided himself on being a caring father. He was remembered among those close to him as a very hands-on dad, who with the little kids was always down taking them for a walk or reading bedtime stories. After dummying his royal duties, it was a liberty to live out of the constant gaze of photographers in their family estate-lives. The sudden idea or suggestion that his family times may be as fake and unnatural as he thought rattled him to the core. Friends who knew Harry best noticed his response was one of anger. Instead of an explosive outburst, it was actually a deeply simmering anger from feeling lied to and kept in the dark. Sibling_REV_Lushan it said he later had words with Meghan over the phone and asked why she couldn't have brought up specifics about the setup in a more emotionally reminiscent way. According to the people who described the conversation, her answers were all about practical issues, Comey's duties, her own schedule, and most importantly ensuring that the event would go well. Of course, the welfare of his children was always going to be a top consideration, but for Harry this wasn't enough. The very words had become symbolic. Community was no longer in the context of that one event, but had a larger meaning. He feared that the family he had fought so hard to keep private was becoming a sideshow. Reports surfaced in the days following the revelation that Harry had begun withdrawing from their regular public engagements. He was even more solitary now, spending hours outside alone, and sometimes he would just go for long drives by himself. Sources close to him claimed that he was not avoiding Meghan but had simply realized that his brother and sister-in-law were shitheads and wanted the time alone to think, without every conversation being about how best to manage their public image. It was as the public and private crisis converged that time became increasingly difficult for him emotionally. The world was not just watching, it was judging, guessing, and often assuming the worst. He had endured great pressure before, but it was always focused on a known enemy: the media, the royal establishment, or an individual critic. This time it was uncertainty as the opponent. An insider described this as a watershed, not because the prince was considering his marriage or his public role at this stage, but because it syndicated for the first time that he and Meghan thought they both held the same values. He had assumed that they both wanted the same thing, a real life, in private, as a family. Now, however, he could not help but consider how probably very different its sort of life would be in her conception of it. At the same time, the external pressures continued incessantly. Every media outlet asked me for a statement. Royal watchers wondered about the state of their relationship. One of them suggested social media, which made the world as gossipy and speculative as little girlhood, but cast this gossip in terms of truth versus falsehood. Even their sympathizers began confiding to one another. Let alone for the likes of Harry, who has seen how stories can snowball, who must have been standing at the center of a storm with no shelter. And this emotional cost was made worse by the realization that so much of Harry's adult life has turned to the task of responding to what he feels were betrayals, a mother's death, a media intrusion into her world once relentless and now frozen, but also the walls coming in from within, block by block, as various erstwhile or supposed friends took tools funded off their father-in-law/brother-in-chief. It was these experiences that shaped him into the person who valued loyalty over all else. The threat to come from the very edifice Chad had constructed to avoid those original wounds was almost too much. Supposedly, he limited his advice to a handful of people who had earned his trust and were not involved in any form of palace intrigue or media manipulation. He was counseled for one thing or the other. One such piece of faux wisdom was to avoid ending up in the pages by getting out ahead and explaining the situation before it baked into an accusation. He was counseled to keep his mouth shut and let these things blow over, not give Bauer any more ammunition. But either of those paths was risky and did not deal at the root level with a betrayal of trust. Control, or rather the lack of it, had been Harry's undoing. Both before and, especially, after their resignation as senior working royals last month, it had become a defining feature of Harry and Meghan's new public profile. In laying out exactly what they want to convey, each interview, media project, and public appearance combines slivers to create an image. It broke from this the control with the leaked tape, unscripted and away from their sure hands. To a man who had never revealed a secret since his youth, the helplessness must have been hard to bear. A man caught between truths that all played out for observers who encountered him in the wake of that tape_Elise, where his internal struggle was all too evident. While struggling to juggle his own union with his family, he becomes more and more uncomfortable with how their lives are playing out in the upper echelons of society. A balance between things which is so delicate that it cannot be kept forever. Eventually, one or a combination of these, the public narrative, private compromises and maybe even the marriage, will have to fuck off. The importance of this point is that it goes beyond mere scandal and into the private life of Harry. It's a point at which all the different forces, loyalty to family, fear of public criticism or simply your own principles, all come together. Caught in this crash, he is forced to address long-ignored questions. Tom Bauer, the fearless investigative journalist who had often trampled on the toes of some very powerful people in politics, business, media, and even royalty. Almost never do his works accurately capture their beauty. They examine it like a killer does, scraping back the gloss of prose to expose what he believes to be the naked kernel of truth. His participation in that leaked tape brouhaha is made all the more credible and intriguing by his long resume of selective revelations for people who might not know much about him. Bauer, whose strategy is an amalgam of intensive research, aggressive sourcing and timing that verges on the theatrical. Evans constructs information rather than just revealing it. The Meghan tape is being released using just such a formula. Now we have a slow burn instead of everything at once. Or amid the digital white noise, strategic insertion of a single clip that is damning yet leaves much more to be desired. What inspired this calculated move? Many different reasons are possible, and the truth may well be a combination of all. This is one of the most obvious motives. stirring controversy attracts attention. Bauer's books are bestsellers, mainly because of a topical link to the current headline story. Such a massive disclosure does portend that there will be quite a lot of public interest in his next project. He might not be going to release all of it at once. He drops bits of information slowly, creating a reiterative attention cycle. Still, there is one nugget of belief. Whether reservations are agreed upon or not, Bauer has long presented himself as an opponent of the double standards of public life. He presents his work as an exercise in transparency, revealing a behind-the-scenes look at everything that happens beyond the PR. A man like Bauer ought to have an appreciative field day with Meghan Markle. She is someone who has become famous with a line down the middle, between critics and supporters, her public image both carefully cultivated and loudly disputed. Bauer, who has a history with the British royal family and its environs, adds another layer. Despite not being afraid to critique your town palace insiders, he has got additionally held in with those very loops. He is not just outing Meghan by releasing this recording. He is, in other words, also arguably positioning himself with some of the groups within the royal establishment who regard her as a destabilizing influence. This does not necessarily mean that he is working as an agent, acting directly on their behalf, but it clearly means his disclosures are in someone's benefits either intentionally or inadvertently. The timing of it also suggests something about his motives. That also comes at a point when Harry and Meghan are facing intense public scrutiny. Poor media ventures left the family strained and made it harder to believe in their side of the story. But dumping the recording into that atmosphere made sure it was going to hit, and hit big. This is a tactic Bauer has used before, waiting for the moment when his subject is least able to mount a strong defense. Bauer has been cautious during post-release interviews not to make outright allegations, which could lead to legal consequences. Rather, he styles his statements as observations and questions, using phrases such as behavioral patterns and inconsistency. Bauer demonstrates both by subtly guiding us toward his own interpretation and allowing the audience to arrive at their own. Bringing in low also speaks to the way Bauer operates. In insisting the evidence speaks for itself, even as he constructs a narrative, not only is he perhaps trying to shame Meghan, I suspect he may also wish that if this is in fact mountainous wrong loaded his own credibility share of the Sussex brand spin, especially on matters as emotionally charged as family life. Destroying their romantic vision of domesticity, which carries them so elegantly into the tale of a prison break from the cold arm-to-arm that is palace life and de facto reality in a fashion that deals this image with another crippling blow and thus damages it like no other. Others attribute his motives to strategic seeding, hoping to inspire feedback which will then trigger more disclosures. There is a chance Bauer has more recordings or evidence that they are holding onto to see how Harry and Meghan respond. He said he might release further material if they deny his claims. If they lie silent, the public could evaluate them as guilty. Either way, Bauer stays in control. But personal animosity cannot be ruled out. Though Bauer keeps the dry veneer on in his public utterances, it's clear he strongly feels Meghan is a key player in the royal bust-up and has been playing games with her image. The fact that he once criticized her self-promotion and victimhood have suggested to some observers that the now-released recordings could be his fiercest ammunition in putting pressure on her version of events. Bauer's effect was that he is just better at playing the long game, appreciating public opinion to be made of perception more than evidence. A single comment, disappearing half a day later, taking stronger root on its own within the next 24 hours. What I love about his method is that it's based on casting the seed of doubt without needing to prove every detail in absolute certainty. He is merely the sower of doubt, and it is for the public and media to water this seed. The real story, Bauer's interest in Meghan may have started with the Duchess, but it quickly moves into conversations about how people manage their public images in current-day celebrity culture. A textbook example of this is Meghan, the globally recognized and carefully crafted form of communication, doing much all the work for her to be considered one of the most important figures on Earth. At that point, she is most vulnerable because her control has been compromised. Harry and Meghan be seriously concerned if Bauer was being smokescreened, just candidly speaking on his own, and also people likely to continue poking on this front ad infinitum. If it is his intention to damage their public image, then he can slowly build a narrative that keeps the fire burning and forces them into action or suffer the consequences. This causes a slow drip of damage rather than dropping an anvil, and it has worked for him in the past. Whether it is for money or because of vendetta as non-defensive patents, defensive claims, and joined patent pooling with other players. And if The Intercept wants to prompt more abuse, Bauer's release of the tape already achieved one key objective in any media struggle. Even that much is enough to change the conversation. Now trapped in this recording, Harry and Meghan may have been the target of these subjects, becoming part of their tapestry all along when news of the tape first broke. But Buckingham Palace did not immediately respond or release a statement about the tape. The silence was telling. Though anyone who knows royal protocol saw this as par for the course. Part of the reason behind the monarchy's longevity is a recognition that it cannot afford knee-jerk reactions. The palace has long been a protected fortress during times of trouble. By not making a sudden movement to take out your knife again, not opening my big mouth and, if completely unavoidable by situation, no eye contact. But those walls were anything but peaceful. The first inklings of the story were filtering through to the palace via media monitoring services and online chatter. These are people who need to know beforehand the great slanderous scandal where any coffee clutch involving a family member might morph into this. Within hours, the advisors were writing internal reports about the escalating coronavirus lengths and starting to map the likely consequences and how they would affect them once Meghan's name began trending. King Charles was party to the briefing at the palace, sources indicated. His reaction, they disclosed subsequently, was not just about Meghan but raised concerns of the establishment getting insecure. Knowing all too well the upset of child scandals touching on the royal family, Charles was aware of how delicate such situations were. He knew firsthand how mercilessly society is inclined to heap pity on minors, how swiftly it coalesces into anger when those children are seen to have been used for branding or political purposes. The way forward for Charles was certainly evident: the lesser amount the palace play an element in events as they developed, the reduced likelihood of becoming embroiled in a scandal. Brindley knew this, and that by drawing attention onto Harry and Meghan he could appear dignified while also swatting away criticisms of exploitation for institutional gain. The final point may have made a compelling case for having the palace staff announce that they were discreetly poised behind Harry to present an united front on behalf of the monarchy. Instead, someone in that room prevailed and said, "No, we will not play this game any further." But Prince William was said to be more affected by the news. Tension had been building between the siblings for years, and this recording was just one more link in the chain steadily circling both of their lives. Due in part to the stability of the frame which William has built for his public image, any scandal involving Harry is going to attract comparisons. According to a close source, the fact that the tape sounds pretty much as one would expect, however unverified it may be, was very disappointing to William. He is said to have told someone that this type of thing happens when you live your life in the public eye. While Kate Middleton has remained very tight-lipped over her brother-in-law's actions, it is believed she was most concerned for the children. People close to her say she prefers to protect the couple's children from much of the uglier side of public life. Behind closed doors, she has expressed her sadness at how every single time Archie and Lily are concerned, it is embroiled in disputes on baptism invites or photo release or now leaked conversations hinting their absence from everyday life. Meanwhile, one of the leading courtiers saw an opportunity in what was happening. Every scandal that besmirches Harry and Meghan boosts the reputation of the working royals who have fallen in line with the institution. It makes seeing William and Kate in public all the time so easy to reconcile with the Meghan and Harry that were always, before, They weren't doing anything worse than the other royals of their age, but now we know otherwise. The palace does not stage these events, to be sure, but it certainly knows how to benefit surgically. There were also suggestions, no matter for the deed that it was not issued by palace, but as long as the recording exists and future dealing with Harry may be won, its shadow has compromised any chance of a reconciliation. Trust, that is already shaking, would be harder to restore. Harry is likely to be less inclined to engage in private conversations if he has reason to believe palace officials are pushing, or at least leaking, negative stories. The longer scandal succeeds in eroding the popular mandate behind him, the fewer backers he may have outside the palace grounds and the greater incentives he will find to look for shelter elsewhere. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more breaking royal updates. And of course, hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.